All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. Today, I'm talking about Theodore Roosevelt's lasting impact on the North American model of wildlife conservation. Theodore Roosevelt, revered as the conservationist president, fundamentally transformed the American conservation movement. His presidency from 1901 to 1909 marked a shift in environmental policy driven by his experiences in the North Dakota Badlands, where he witnessed overhunting and habitat loss. Challenging the notion of inexhaustible natural resources, Roosevelt championed sustainable and scientifically informed resource management. He established the United States Forest Service, safeguarded 150 million acres as national forests, initiated the federal bird reserves, and expanded the national park system, including Crater Lake and Mesa Verde. Roosevelt's legacy, epitomized by the Antiquities Act of 1906 and its protection of landmarks like Devil's Tower and the Grand Canyon, laid the foundation for modern conservation, viewing natural resources as a public trust to be sustainably managed for future generations. Theodore Roosevelt's passion for wildlife and natural history began in his childhood. Despite being a sickly child with asthma, he was intellectually curious and loved the outdoors. His interest in natural history was ignited at the age of 8 when he acquired a seal skull, leading to the creation of his own natural history museum at home. Inspired by Darwin's On the Origin of Species, Roosevelt's fascination with nature deepened. Roosevelt's father played a crucial role in his development, encouraging him to overcome his physical limitations and foster a love for the outdoors. This led to Roosevelt's robust involvement in physical activities and an appreciation for nature. At Harvard, he initially studied natural history, becoming vice president of the Natural History Society, and later shifting his focus to politics. His early experiences and academic pursuits in natural history laid the groundwork for his future conservation efforts, blending his passion for the environment with a pragmatic approach to conservation and wildlife management. During his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt made significant contributions to conservation in the United States, establishing a legacy that profoundly shaped the nation's approach to environmental stewardship. He founded the United States Forest Service in 1905 and set aside 150 million acres as national forests, emphasizing sustainable resource use. Additionally, Roosevelt played a pivotal role in the expansion of the national park system, establishing 23 of the 35 sites that existed by 1916, including notable parks like Crater Lake and Mesa Verde. He was also instrumental in creating 51 federal bird reserves, the precursors to today's national wildlife refuges. Roosevelt's conservation efforts were underpinned by a scientific understanding of wildlife and natural resources. His appointment of Gifford Pinchot as the first chief of the United States Forest Service marked a commitment to scientifically informed forest management. This approach reflected a balance between utilizing and conserving natural resources, setting a precedent for future conservation practices. Roosevelt's policies were guided by the wise use philosophy, which emphasized the responsible and sustainable use of natural resources, integrating both aesthetic and ecological values. His presidency marked a transformative period in American conservation, with his innovative policies laying the groundwork for modern environmental stewardship and sustainable resource management. Roosevelt's comprehensive approach combined scientific insight with practical conservation measures, advancing the cause of environmental preservation in the United States and influencing future generations' approach to managing natural landscapes and wildlife. The North American model of wildlife conservation, significantly influenced by Theodore Roosevelt, is a set of guiding principles for wildlife management and conservation in North America. Its roots trace back to the 19th century conservation movements and the near extinction of species like the American bison. The model is based on the idea that wildlife is a non-commercial public resource managed to maintain optimal population levels indefinitely. Central to this model are several key tenets. Wildlife is considered a public trust resource managed by the state and federal governments for the benefit of all citizens. Commercial hunting and wildlife sale are prohibited, preventing the privatization of these natural resources. Wildlife allocation is determined by law, ensuring democratic and equitable access. The killing of wildlife is restricted to legitimate purposes like food and self-defense, and wildlife management extends beyond national boundaries, requiring international cooperation. Science is foundational in wildlife policy, informed by studies in various ecological disciplines. The model also recognizes the importance of public participation in hunting, supported by Roosevelt's belief in its societal benefits. This democratization of hunting contributes significantly to conservation funding. The model evolved in response to the early lack of wildlife protection laws in North America, leading to dramatic reductions in wildlife populations. Key legislations, including the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Pittman-Robertson Act, established a legal and funding framework for conservation. Theodore Roosevelt's vision and subsequent developments in the North American model signify a paradigm shift in wildlife management. They balance human and wildlife needs, ensuring sustainable wildlife resources for future generations. Theodore Roosevelt's legacy in wildlife and wilderness conservation is profound and lasting. As president, he established Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge in Florida in 1903, the first of its kind, setting a precedent for federal wildlife conservation. Throughout his presidency, Roosevelt issued 51 executive orders to establish wildlife reservations across 17 states and 3 territories, including vital seabird sanctuaries like Quileute Needles in Washington and the Farallon Islands in California. Roosevelt's actions shaped the concept of public land ownership in the United States, emphasizing that wildlife and natural resources are public assets. His vision highlighted the interconnectedness of ecosystems, a principle that remains integral to modern conservation efforts. His early contributions to protected areas and wildlife refuges have laid the groundwork for ongoing biodiversity and ecosystem preservation efforts. Today, scientists and conservationists continue to build on Roosevelt's work, demonstrating the enduring impact of his environmental stewardship and natural resource management. Roosevelt's conservation legacy, while pioneering, was not without its controversies, particularly regarding the treatment of Native Americans. His administration's establishment of national parks and forest lands often led to the displacement of indigenous peoples from their ancestral territories. This policy was a continuation of the long-standing practice of forcibly removing Native Americans from their lands, further exacerbating their loss of homes, food sources, and sacred sites. The creation of these protected areas, such as the Chaco Culture National Historical Park and Glacier National Park, often clashed with the indigenous views of these lands as sacred and integral to their culture and way of life. Roosevelt's personal views and racial biases also influenced his policies. He held derogatory views towards Native Americans, seeing them as inferior and supporting the removal from their ancestral territories. This approach was reflective of a broader Euro-American perspective that viewed these areas as wilderness needing civilization and control, a view shared by some of his contemporaries like John Muir. This fundamental clash of worldviews led to significant cultural and social impacts on indigenous communities. The impact of Roosevelt's conservation efforts on indigenous people's way of life was profound. For example, the establishment of Glacier National Park on lands once home to the Blackfeet tribe resulted in the loss of their traditional way of life, including sacred areas and hunting grounds. Native leaders like Chief White Calf of Blackfeet strongly opposed these changes, highlighting the deep cultural losses experienced by indigenous communities due to Roosevelt's conservation policies. This aspect of his legacy reflects the complex and often troubling history of conservation in America. Theodore Roosevelt's legacy in conservation and wildlife management in the United States is both profound and enduring. His visionary approach, marked by the establishment of the United States Forest Service, numerous national parks, wildlife refuges, and the implementation of the Antiquities Act, laid the foundation for modern environmental stewardship and sustainable resource management. His policies balancing conservation and use set a precedent that continues to influence how natural resources are managed and preserved. Roosevelt's impact extends to the principles of the North American model of wildlife conservation, emphasizing scientific research and public trust in wildlife management, thus shaping contemporary conservation policies and practices. That was an essay I wrote on Theodore Roosevelt and his impacts on conservation. I hope you learned something, and I'm going to be doing a whole series on the people who helped found the North American model of wildlife conservation. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of work that was done in the past that we're kind of riding on today. I think it's very important for people to know. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. I'll be back soon with another episode.